you've got to be ready to do things differently, especially if you're going from the person that is across the hall from you or sitting next to you, and you have all the sort of cultural affinity. You've got a lot of shared background. The Venn diagram of life and work experiences has a lot of overlap, and then you outsource, and it can feel like the Venn diagram has no or very little overlap.
Welcome, everybody. This is another episode of Build Smart Blueprint. Today, I'm really excited to introduce our guest. So our guest today is Aaron McGinnis. Aaron is from the States, so our first guest from outside of the UK.
Gosh, I'm number one.
It's number one. So Aaron is an interesting case, or a specialist as a contractor. So Aaron runs and founder of Craft Build, a building contractor over in the States. But for us, a very interesting case because Aaron is also an outsourcing specialist. So he is also the founder and CEO of Contractors Team, so an outsourcing company that focuses on financial bookkeeping outsourcing. And we'll get to that in a second. But one other thing I did want to mention, and this is me just kind of digging into my own interests here, is Aaron, I believe you are a fan of combat sports and a practitioner of combat sports as well.
True story.
I grabbed that from your our conversations in your LinkedIn profile. I want to go there if I can right now, because I just came from jiu-jitsu. I've got jiu-jitsu in a couple of hours as well, and I noticed that you're a practitioner as well, and Arthur as well is a bit of a combat sports head as well. How have you found training in combat sports, jiu-jitsu, that kind of thing? How does that relate to what you do in business?
Yeah, so I've been doing some form of combat sport since I was about knee high. Of course, I think everybody has their story about, probably took some karate classes as a kid. I took it fairly seriously and started doing Goju-Ryu karate when I was in high school, and then transitioned from that into, I did that and also stand-up jiu-jitsu, so old thing, Aiki jiu-jitsu, and transitioned from that into Muay Thai when I was in early college, and then stuck with that for really the rest of my life. So a long history of that, and a long history of Aiki Jiu-Jitsu as well. So think if Brazilian, you guys know this, but if Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is derivative from Newaza in Judo, then Aiki Jiu-Jitsu is everything that happens literally, if you think horizontally, above Newaza. Yep. So while you guys focus on the groundwork, we focus on more arresting techniques. And then in the past year or so, I've been doing quite a bit of historic European martial arts, which means fencing. So think longsword and sword and buckler, particularly. So you could say that if somebody spends 8 to 12 hours a week doing a combat sport of some type for 20 plus years, it's probably got a pretty big impact on the way that they think about the world and the way they interact with the world. And I think one of the biggest things that one might abstract from combat sports over to running a business, starting a business, is patience. In combat sports, it's really easy to get frustrated when you hit a perceived plateau and you don't know how to get past that, and you don't perceive that you're getting better, and there's not a clear path forward. And what I tell young practitioners is, when you hit that plateau, find something very small and specific that you want to work on. Don't think about, I'm going to spar or I'm going to roll. Think about, I want to practice the way that my hip moves when I throw a reverse punch, or I want to practice the way that I get up on the ball with my foot when I'm throwing a round kick, or I want to focus on the way I transfer my weight when I'm throwing a teep. And I think the same thing is honest to God true in business. When we hit plateaus, the best way to get past that is to find one specific thing that you want to work on and then dig into that. And usually, just like in combat sports, when you dig into those principles, those basic precepts of how we move and how we think and how we interact, then you find other things that get better as a result. Oh, I've got better control over my hips now. Oh, I've got better control over my weight distribution. I'm making a better fist. I'm wrapping my hands better so that I can hit harder. Small things like that. And the same thing, I think, translates into the world of business is you focus on something small, and maybe it's my chart of accounts needs to be tweaked. And that leads you down a rabbit hole, and suddenly you're finding, oh, we still have a Spotify account that Jane, an employee, signed up for 4 years ago, but she hasn't worked here in 2 years. Why am I still spending money on the Spotify account? Or in the case of the construction world, oh, we have about 18 miles of air hose because for whatever reason, the air hose keeps getting left in the shop, and then whoever's out in the field just buys another air hose at Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards or whatever. How can we stop doing that? How do we find small efficiencies that are going to add up over time? Ta-da.
I'm a little bit kind of like paused there because you really took me a little bit with your answer, because I was sort of expecting, I guess, my own experience in terms of frustration and and a place to kind of get all of that out. But I never really thought more of like the deeper level of what you were saying, of kind of developing that ability to break something down and not get frustrated by like the lack of visual progress, and actually kind of trust the process almost, which if you are kind of in that kind of combat sports world, you've got to kind of learn.
I think it's also about being coachable. As young entrepreneurs, something that I see a lot is we don't want to ask anybody's advice or opinion, and we certainly want to do it our way. And usually it takes financial ruin to break an entrepreneur out of that mindset. That experience can be gained from coaches. And in combat sports, if you take that same approach, and then you spar for the first time and you just get wrecked, right? And you realize, oh, maybe someone needs to tell me what the heck I'm supposed to be doing. And if you can take that attitude of being coachable and seeking the wisdom of people who have been there before in business, then you're going to get a lot further, a lot faster, and hopefully be a lot more profitable.
I want to ask you, Aaron, about because you mentioned about the kind of, I guess, the resilience that you get for you over 20 years of practicing some form of combat sport. And something that struck me as very interesting was Craft Build, your company that you continue to run now. You started it in possibly the worst time anyone could choose, the 2009 recession, right?
It's really bad.
Yeah. So how was that experience? Because I was fortunate enough to kind of, I guess, start my firm and ride a wave that kind of I benefited from. But I feel like you must have been in the opposite. And how did you kind of, during a time like that, stay kind of plodding along and kind of build the business during that period?
It was awful. I mean, straight up, it was bad. We got a front row seat to the Titanic kind of going vertical and then breaking apart in the middle, and everybody scurrying off the deck and trying to get into a life raft. And for a long time, what we learned was during that time that we weren't taking ideal work. We were taking any work that came our way. And we had some business partnerships that went horrifically south. So what those early formative years really were helpful for is A, learning the value of taking correct work, taking ideal work, and B, learning the value of a partner that is truly a partner and not just someone who's going to take advantage of you as soon as they possibly can. And something that's been really interesting, especially in the past 2 years or so, as the economy has really started to turn. I mean, especially in 2020 and forward, as the economy turned and there wasn't just money on the table at all times, it gave us a lot of resiliency to say, you know what, we know kind of what may be coming here. This is how we can react to this, and this is how we can hopefully survive this with aplomb instead of running ourselves into the ground. Taking the outlook of don't take jobs just to take them, make sure that they're actually going to be profitable jobs, and make sure that you're running those numbers, and then making sure that you're staying on top of those numbers as the project continues. One of the things that we were really fortunate in during 2020, when lumber prices, I don't know how it was there, but here lumber prices tripled, quadrupled,
Yeah.
quintupled. You know, the cost of a stud went from about $2.50 each to over $16. And a lot of contractors that were used to being able to fly along and order lumber today, pay for it in 30 days, got wrecked because they got the bills and they had quoted as if studs were going to be $2 or $3 a piece, and then they come in at $16 a piece, and they weren't watching their price sheets. And something that we were doing very, very much was watching those price sheets and saying, okay, before we order this, oh, the lumber prices went up. We have to requote this to the customer. And we had some customers that, you know, obviously they weren't real happy when the cost of their lumber packages quintupled, but at the same time, it meant that we stayed in business.
Yeah. It seems, I don't know if it seems a bit of a pattern perhaps with yourself, Aaron, because I remember when I spoke to you previously about your kind of move into starting to outsource some of your business operations. It came from a drive of need to cut costs. How can we kind of find a little bit more margin in the jobs?
Yeah.
And it almost seems like perhaps a theme for yourself of like when you're in that hardship, that's where you kind of you've got to find solutions, and that's where you kind of take action. Can you give us a bit more, like if you were to take yourself back to when you were first in that stage of like outsourcing work came into your awareness, what came to your mind? How did that become an option? And then like, how did you kind of go about actually implementing that into your business?
Yeah. So I got to give some credit where credit is due to my wife and business partner, Gina, for actually coming up with some of these ideas in the first place. But if we turn the clock back to 2017, 2018, 2019, there was actually a rise in construction costs, in material costs, and a rise in labor costs. And as we were trying to figure out, okay, what can we do to continue to be competitive in a marketplace where we have, frankly, competition that doesn't watch their costs very well and continue to make a living? You sit down with your P&L and you look at that breakdown and you say, where are we spending the vast bulk of our money? And what has changed between when we started this business in 2009 and where we're at in 2018? And overwhelmingly, labor. Human resources are incredibly expensive and a huge liability. Um, and when we really started to break down, okay, like at the time, for example, we had a office manager who had been with me for 6 or 7 years at that point. Like, she was our oldest employee. We really liked her.
Yeah.
But her job existed entirely behind a computer. She never left the office. And Gina made the observation that, hey, this person's job can exist anywhere. And as much as we love Connie, that's an expensive line item. And having all of the overhead that surrounds this person is expensive. You have to have an office space for her at the very least. There's computers, there's phones, there's taxes, there's insurance, there's all these sort of things that go along with having just a simple office employee. So we started to really look at alternatives, and it's one of those things where you get used to doing things a certain way. Like when we started in 2009, there was absolutely technology, right? We had that, but there wasn't broadband in enough places in the world to allow outsourcing on the scale that we have now. And there wasn't a lot of, frankly, there wasn't as many cloud-based resources then as there are now. And so when we started to really look at, okay, if we remove the locational dependence from this person's, from this job, from this list of things that we need done, what we found was, well, yes, we can cut costs by 90% for that position by offshoring the job. And I know that for a lot of people, that is a really unpopular decision, because especially in America and especially in construction, we tend to be fairly zip code focused and a little bit xenophobic, if I'm being honest. But from a dollars and cents perspective, it made a lot of sense.
Was it something that you openly shared with your clients, that, you know, the person they were talking to on the other end of the phone was, I think in your case, in India, or was that something that you kind of shielded, or how did you approach that?
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? So what we have learned is that people don't react well to an Indian accent. They just don't. Rightly or wrongly, and I think it's wrongly, I think it's a little xenophobic on our part, but people don't react well to that. And so what we've had to do is make sure that our Indian team, and they're in Kolkata, they do a great job. They've been working with us now for 6 years. We have to be fairly careful that our Kolkata team only ever has voice interactions with vendors, basically. And we use a different team for answering phones and doing outreach type services. We have a team in El Salvador that handles phone work.
And I guess that because of your location, there isn't as much kind of resistance from someone hearing like a Hispanic accent or something like that compared to an
Exactly.
Indian accent. Yeah,
exactly. And it's not so hard to find people in El Salvador that have even grown up in the U.S. And so they have, like our primary CSR grew up in Texas, and lived there until he was, I think, in his early 20s, and then moved to El Salvador to be with family. And so he's got a hint of a Hispanic accent, which, yeah, people don't blink even twice. But he also has a high degree of cultural affinity. So he's shopped at a Home Depot. He knows what a Starbucks is. I mean, our Indian team knows what a Starbucks is, but they've never shopped at a Home Depot. They've never been to a Lowe's. building supply stores that are in the U.S. So there's a different degree of cultural affinity that comes along with that.
What, just stepping back, I'm interested, when you very first thought about, the outsourcing option, were you ready, and did you know what you were getting into, and did you know, because you talked about cloud, like the applications weren't there before, they are now. Did you have that set up, or did you go like, oh, great, let's outsource this, and then you realized, oh, hold on a second, we're not even equipped to outsource? What was that situation like?
Yeah, there was an adjustment period. So there was absolutely an adjustment period. So when we first got started, for example, our QuickBooks lived on a virtual private server, which, yes, we could access from anywhere, but it was a little bit clunky. And we didn't really have, for example, a great way to share login credentials. Up till then, it had been like the ubiquitous Word document that, you throw on the cloud server and whatever, man. I mean, it's just us, right? But then you start introducing a different layer of security complexity. And I mean, at that point, we sat down and we were going through it, and we found out, I mean, God bless, we have 500 freaking logins. And what do we do with all this? How do we control this access? How do we do this correctly so that we're not just opening ourselves up to massive, security problems? And so we started getting that under control. We started using LastPass, and we started migrating things over to more cloud-oriented solutions. Up till then, we had been using like the email server that I set up using SmarterMail in 2010 or something like that. And we'd been running that for 8 years, but it wasn't super secure and it wasn't very scalable. And we figured out, oh, well, okay, back in 2009, if you wanted Microsoft to host your email, it cost like $87 million a month. And now it costs $10 a month per user. So great, we'll do that. So yeah, there was absolutely a catch-up phase where we were figuring out all the bits and pieces of technology and how to use it and how to run it, and then how to integrate this international team onto that. I mean, in phone systems, how do you handle that? And it took some time to get down that learning curve. Like, okay, here we can do this for our phone system so that we can all make phone calls from a unified phone number, and our team in El Salvador can handle the phones and all these kinds of issues. And then how do you handle third-party authentication that's all been run off this one phone line? So now you got to like start breaking things out. So yeah, there's absolutely a level of technical complexity that until you get down that road, you're like not going to know what to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, we're big proponents of, outsourcing or exploring those options. Obviously, you are as well, just given the name of your company.
Big time.
But I'm conscious of this not becoming like a circle jerk of talking about outsourcing as a positive. And I wonder whether, Aaron, you can look back at that time of when you made that transition. And I know it's a long time ago. And we've talked about, the tech issues. We've talked about the kind of cultural like interface with the client. Can you think of any other kind of challenges or drawbacks or things that, you may want to consider as a construction business owner before you kind of dip into the kind of world of, virtually outsourcing your office operations?
Yeah. I'm going to go back to patience. One of the huge problems that I see, especially construction companies have when they start to try and outsource, is they want things to happen right away, instantly, overnight, and almost like a Deus ex machina type situation. Like, I hired this person, why can't they read my mind and do exactly what I want them to do right away? How do I train someone who's not going to be sitting next to me ever? And there's tools now to do it, like Loom and screen captures and things like that. But you have to have the patience for it. And especially if you're going to go to an offshored culture where there's strict hierarchies, that can be tough to try and figure out. Like Indian culture, they want explicit instructions on how to do things, like tell them exactly. And if you don't tell them exactly, they're not going to, it's not that they'll do it wrong. They won't do it. And if you come from a let's get her done partner culture where, you're going to send Joe out there and by golly, he's going to give it the college try and maybe he'll fuck it up, but it'll be done one way or another at the end of the day. And then, you try and treat your Indian coworkers like that. And they're like, nope, we're not going to do it. We're just going to tell me exactly what you want me to do. Cause they're terrified of messing it up.
Yeah.
And so that right there can be hugely frustrating. And you just got to get into the cadence of how to do that. And there can be some frustration with time lag as well. Like, it's an almost perfect inversion of calendar. So either you're up at all hours trying to talk with them, or they're going to be up at all hours trying to talk with you. And there's got to be some balance in there, or it's just going to be like, I'm exhausted and I don't feel like I'm getting anything done.
From a point of view of, patience is about a kind of mentality thing, character. Are there any other sort of characteristics or traits, or maybe even it's a situation thing, and maybe there's a certain level of frustration or something that because I think there are some times when people look for solutions and I talk to them, I'm like, you're not ready. Like mentally, you're not there yet. You say this is a problem, but are there any other aspects that you think, you need to be in this frame of mind in order to kind of adopt this?
Yeah, you've got to be ready to do things differently, especially if you're going from the person that is across the hall from you or sitting next to you, and you have all the sort of cultural affinity. You've got a lot of shared background. The Venn diagram of life and work experiences has a lot of overlap. And then you outsource and it can feel like the Venn diagram has no overlap or very little overlap. You don't have a shared background in schooling. You don't have a shared background in how you live your life or what you do. And that right there can cause a lot of frustration if you're not ready to frankly roll with that and be willing to take the time to try and understand. And if you get frustrated first, then your staff, just like in any other, hierarchical relationship, if you get frustrated first, then that's going to rub off, and pretty soon you're going to be ending up in a very negative place. So you've got to be willing to, again, have that patience and work through the different personalities, the different life experience, and remind yourself, like, this can be done. And you have to be willing to say, in some cases, how do I need to change my processes to facilitate this person doing the thing that I want them to do? Because there may be some things that have to change. You may not be able to rely on the same processes. You're going to have to come up with things.
I want to get into Contractors Team because I really love businesses, or I love entrepreneurs that set up businesses to kind of scratch their own itch. And I really feel this is a great kind of example of this.
I think so.
Can you, because I think it's just such a strong value proposition, right? It's kind of like you've been there. How did you go from, like, what was the reasoning for you to think, okay, I'm actually going to, step, or not step away, but balance this kind of busy construction company to now set up Contractors Team. Could you kind of walk us through that journey and what you've done there?
Yeah. So we started using outsourced bookkeeping pretty quickly within a couple of years of starting the business. And the first three bookkeepers we had were awful. They cost me tens of thousands of dollars in poor work, and then having to go back and fix them. And the worst part was we never really knew if we were making money while we had poor bookkeeping. And in retrospect, it was as much my fault as it was the bookkeeper's fault because I was hiring the wrong person. We were consistently hiring people who either worked for landlords or they had different types of businesses and they didn't really understand construction. Now, they represented that they did, but they didn't really. And then what we found was as we got tighter and tighter on our own operational requirements for month-end reporting and understanding whether or not we were making money, we actually had a very hard time finding bookkeepers who would roll with the intense data entry requirements and the intense data hygiene requirements to do the sort of percentage of completion, cost code, bookkeeping, and accounting that we wanted. And so what we did was we started training our own team to do it. And there's a couple of specific software packages that are intended for contractors, and I'm thinking specifically of Buildertrend and JobTread. And most bookkeepers don't want to learn those software packages. They want to learn QuickBooks and they want to run QuickBooks. And QuickBooks is a fine program, but it does not really work well for contractors. And so after we had pretty much mastered the art of working with the software packages and we understood very well what the operational needs were, we realized, hot diggity, this is a saleable service. Like, this has real value to it. We know how to do it. We're masters in it. Let's start offering this to the world at large and see if we can help other contractors. And that's really what we're trying to do. If you want to, look at a vision statement or a mission statement, our whole objective is to bring clarity to an underserved market, which is what contractors are. They're an underserved market.
And obviously, and I assume it's at the moment, or perhaps that's for the foreseeable future, the focus is around the kind of bookkeeping, the financial kind of commercial management, essentially, of a project or of a construction company. Was there a particular reason you decided to focus on that, other than naturally the course of your business took you there, or is there sort of some strategic kind of decision as to why you feel like that's where you want to focus right now?
Yeah. So the first reason that we are focusing on bookkeeping is because A, we understand it very, very well. And B, it really is an underserved niche. And I know that sounds weird because the construction industry is enormous. I mean, it's many, many billions of dollars. But the vast bulk of the residential construction world is firms that make the top line somewhere between 1.5 and $5 million a year and have 5 or fewer employees. The National Association of Home Builders, every other year, I think it is, put out a cost of doing business study where they poll their membership and they ask questions like, okay, what's your top line revenue? What's your bottom line revenue? What are your margins? How many people work for you? What are the positions that they're in? And if you skim through that book, it's overwhelmingly $1.5 to $5 million a year. The margins are not thick, and it's usually fewer than 5 people in an office. And what we see is that the bookkeepers who are out there to service this industry, who understand how to complete a contract schedule at the end of the month, and B, who are able to actually work within the specific management programs, not just in QuickBooks, but work within Buildertrend or JobTread or Adaptive or one of these kind of programs, is really small. And so we look at this and we say, wow, we think there's a red pool here.
Do you typically work with builders and contractors that already have some level of financial management in place but are looking to just move it to a kind of lower cost center? Or are you kind of working with ones that are not doing anything and you're adding that as a service, but it only happens to be outsourced just because of, it just makes it a more competitive kind of offer? Do you see what I'm getting at?
So the vast bulk of clients that we have signed on have QuickBooks or JobTread, sometimes both, or they have QuickBooks or Buildertrend, sometimes both, but they're not really using the tools correctly. And so in a lot of cases, they've ended up with almost more confusion than if they were just trying to do it with Excel. And so most of the time what we end up having to do is come in and clean up the chart of accounts in QuickBooks and set up their cost codes correctly in Buildertrend or JobTread, and set up the data integrations so that they're matching in a way that's meaningful, so that we can even get to ground zero. And I've had clients come to us who have never had a reconciliation done, or they've got like the proverbial box of digital, the shoebox of receipts, but it's a digital shoebox of receipts. So, everything is on like a single Google Drive or something like that. And I've literally had customers come in who have been in business for 10 years. And once we straighten things out and we start sending them their monthly P&Ls, I've had them come back and say, oh my God, I've been doing this for a decade and I've never had a meaningful financial report ever, because no one's ever been able to provide that to me. And that for me is like, we're making a difference.
Yeah. I think a lot of guys are in that situation, that digital shoebox or even physical one, where they just hand it over to an accountant, a firm. They just pass it over. They basically do it for tax reasons. They just go, that whole thing is for tax. I don't really know why, but I just do this thing. And they don't realize actually they could be gaining lots of insight on their business if they were, on top of these things.
So Gina, who is a very, very visually oriented person, she likes making up visual analogies for things, and she has observed that a lot of people in this industry measure whether or not they're making money by looking at their bank account and seeing if the number is going up or down. And that's sort of, like taking a yardstick and standing in front of a big pile of money and like kind of, well, did it get bigger or smaller? Which is no way to figure things out, but I don't know. If that's all you got, that's all you got.
Yeah, I mean, well,
I get it. Yeah, when you're busy, example, right? When you're busy, sometimes it's not with intention. It's just, you just never get round to actually sorting that out because, this job is on fire, this job is behind, this job needs to be priced, and it just always gets pushed to the back, right?
Production is a crying baby. Production is a crying baby that doesn't ever want you to ignore it. And if you get into that reactive place, then it's hard to get ahead of things, and it's hard to see the value of, hey, it's the 5th. I need my report from last month, like now.
Yeah. We have this saying here in the UK, and maybe you have it here. Maybe I'm sure in the US you have something similar, but it's basically shit in, shit out.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I bring it up here is because I'd like you to speak to the construction business owner that may be listening to this and thinks, this is great. I would love to have, accurate cost reporting. I'd love to be able to see how much money I'm actually making compared to my estimates and, all this stuff. But my guys are never going to cost code, like they're never going to place orders and allocate where it's to. And I'm just going to be able to put shit in the machine, and then I'm just going to get shit out. How does one approach that? Like, do you kind of get into that with Contractors Team, like helping the guys deal with that? Because I think that's a really, even from my own personal experience of when I went through this journey of like exactly what you're saying, I'm sick of doing bank balance accounting and trying to sort it out. That was a real struggle.
Can be. So absolutely. One of the problems that we run into is you get the guys in the field who tend not to be the most systems oriented people on earth. And it's hard, I think, for the average office worker, frankly, to relate to what it's actually like to work in construction in the field. And what I always challenge people to try and understand is, okay, especially here, right? So in the Southeast US, go sit in a sauna that's very, very loud and high humidity, really sometimes closer to a steam shower, and try to think in an organized way. I'm going to put an air compressor right next to your head and a bunch of guys driving nails. And now I want you to do just basic arithmetic. Also, you're getting sunburned and you're being mosquito bit. Go. And it's hard for people, I think, especially bookkeepers, to understand what that's like. It's very difficult. And so what I see a lot of times is they try to overcomplicate things. They have cost codes that are too detailed. And so, or the method that they want to handle receipts is too complicated. If it takes more than about 2 or 3 button pushes on a cell phone, like, you've lost me, right? It's not happening. It's easier to throw that Home Depot receipt like underneath the truck seat and, I don't know, boss, figure it out. Not my problem. So part of what we have to do to get around that is set things up correctly. Like when we go back to our job cost codes, we are really strong proponents of, you need enough of them, but you don't need 1 million of them, because no one can remember that. What we need to be able to do is say, this one's for HVAC, this one's for plumbing, this one's for electrical, and on down the list. We don't need to have like 800 different cost codes, because the guys in the field are not going to use that, and it's not really all that helpful. And then how do you get the receipts in? And the way we do it is really simple. You email them. Like, even the most rigidly anti-technology person at this point can take a picture of a receipt and send an email, and that goes into a central ticketing system. So our focus is on keeping things simple enough for the guy in the field to be able to do it correctly, but nuanced enough that the guy in the office can get a useful report out of that.
Interesting. And something we haven't touched on, and maybe I'm getting too much in the nuances of Contractors Team, so tell me
we live in the weeds.
So tell me to back off if it's not the right kind of approach. But I wanted to kind of just get into potential conflicts between site teams and the kind of your contractors. And related to that is, like, when a contractor uses Contractors Team, do they get like an individual that's basically like an employee, or are they outsourcing the entire task to you as a business? And did you choose whichever decision you did go for to kind of, consider that in terms of like, how's that relationship going to be and stuff? Because I know sometimes people react differently if it's like, oh, that company's taking care of that, we got to like take them seriously, where versus, Devinder over here in India, oh, fuck him, like he's just some guy.
Screw this guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if you could give us a bit of insight into that kind of conflict, if there is one.
So we try to be very careful to keep a continuous point of contact. So when someone is working on this person's books, like that's their assigned data handler, that's their assigned technician. And it's really important because everybody's books are going to have a little bit of nuance. So you can't just, do a round robin type system where nobody's really going to know what the heck is going on. We're just keying stuff in and monkey see, monkey do type thing. So no, you've got to have a consistent point of contact. And it's like one of our customers, after a couple of weeks of working with us, he asked me, like, where's Damien located? I said, oh, well, he's in Kolkata. He goes, it blows my mind that this guy who lives half a world away can understand my books the way that he does when I'm here and he's there. I'm like, well, yeah, that's kind of the magic of the internet, frankly. And it's really important. And actually, it comes to a little bit of, that cultural edge that goes both ways. On the one hand, the Indian culture can be a very rigid one where they want things done exactly. And we have culture of one that wants things done exactly. And we have culture two, which is construction in the US, which is kind of like the Wild West at times. And at first, there can definitely be some conflict. Like, why is this person up my ass all the time to tell me what I spent $1.84 at Home Depot for? What does it matter? But then after a couple of months, they're usually like, oh, wait, this guy has my best interest in heart. Like, he is doing this because this is the right way for it to be done. And once we get into that sort of harmony where we find that happy middle ground of we want it done correctly and we want to know what you spent $1.87 at Home Depot for, at that point, you really enter into a fruitful relationship and a cooperative one. But yeah, there can definitely be some conflict. Like, why does this guy get up my butt about the $1.87 at Home Depot? What does it matter? Come on. Well, we got to know because we want to do the job correctly.
I was interested to know just how the pandemic and that I'm hearing more people say in all sorts of industries, why do we have an office? Like, why the fuck do we have to travel an hour to an office, an hour back, when we did it before at home and everything was fine because, we had lockdown and all that? Like, how has that changed people's mentalities, and has that been a good thing for your business?
That's an interesting one. I think residential construction, when you're working in small teams to begin with, has historically been less rigid about home versus office. And you get field managers, especially, who work out of their trucks. I mean, they're in the office infrequently. And then you get owners who, what's the old adage that you start a business so that you can avoid working 40 hours for someone else, but instead work all the hours for yourself, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. Um, I think that the lasting impact of the pandemic has been the realization that once a job becomes locationally independent, it's susceptible to global competition. If I don't need to be in an office to do it, do I need to be in this country to do it? And if I don't need to be in this country to do it, then, well, I'm not competing with the guy down the street or the guy one state over. I'm also competing with the guy in Calcutta or El Salvador or Bosnia. That's where I'm actually looking at to see where can I get this done.
In
And I
my
think that reality hasn't really set in for a lot of Americans yet. A few, like the ones who are going to Thailand and remote working from there. But it's not set in fully. Now, IBM, Microsoft, big companies have known this for years, and they have been leveraging it for years. And if the pandemic has allowed small businesses to start to really grok this idea that I can take these jobs and I can get it done somewhere else, then I think the next decade is going to be really interesting from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's interesting to see, even for us, when we're speaking to builders. I mean, recently had one where now it's kind of AI. You've got the kind of forward-thinking contractors that are already starting to see, okay, what can AI do to start kind of replacing the role of even a human doing the task? And I'm finding it kind of similar in that the kind of the shift that was happening around the COVID time. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out.
I think similarly, a lot of them, they just hear it and they're like, oh, this is a thing. But when you really talk to them, there's like 10 steps behind missing. And, there's no data there to then act on and things like that.
But definitely potential.
AI is really fascinating, and I think that it's going to start replacing a lot of things that we just haven't, a lot of people have not thought of yet. I mean, in bookkeeping, for example, there are already services that are starting to use AI to read receipts and input them, and that is absolutely going to be the future. And right now, all the solutions are kind of duct taped together. Like we've got a bunch of modules, and then we kind of duct tape it, and it's working now. And so they're not really elegant yet. But eventually, you're going to get companies with real financial backing that are going to start throwing a lot of money at that, because they're going to realize, like, ooh, we could probably put bookkeepers out of business. And I think it will happen eventually, maybe sooner than we think.
So we've actually got a podcast coming up soon, just talking about some of these things. So it would be interesting, Aaron. Maybe we can have you on as well to kind of bounce around some ideas and feedback on all these different things.
Love to.
Because really, really enjoyed having you on the podcast and talking about your kind of story from going from contractor to outsourcing kind of provider for contractors. The domain for Contractors Team, www.contractors.team. Is that right?
Yep.
It's a sign of a good domain when I can just read it off the top of my head.
I'm telling you, that one took a lot of coffee to come up with.
But we'll drop the link of Contractors Team in the show notes if anybody does want to reach out to Aaron and the team. But Aaron, do you want to just give a kind of quick outline of what someone can kind of expect in terms of the first contact, how it kind of works if they want to find out a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we do fundamentally is data entry for contractors. So you send us all of your bills, invoices, receipts, etc. We'll input them into, right now, either Buildertrend or JobTread or Adaptive. We'll input by cost code, and then we'll also handle accounts payable and accounts receivable. We'll handle certificates of insurance and W-9s. And then at the end of every month, we're sending out a work in progress report and a contract schedule, along with a corrected profit and loss statement, giving you a really good and accurate view of, did we make money? Did we not make money this month? First steps really are just a consultation, and we'll take a look at where you're at, take a look at what sort of volume you're doing, and then we can price from there.
Amazing. So thank you so much, Aaron. I hope you enjoyed it, because we certainly did.
100%, guys.